3 days before my wedding, my father called me while I was sitting in my workshop working on flower arrangements. He did not ask how I was doing or how the preparations were going. He just told me in 6 plain words that he was not walking me down the aisle. Welcome back to Payback Stories. I'm Megan, and if you enjoy stories about family drama, betrayal, and karma finally catching up, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment. Let's get into it. I grew up in a quiet town in Connecticut where appearance meant everything to my parents. My older sister, Heather, was 3 years older than me and was always the focal point of our household. She was an honor student, captain of the debate team, and took piano lessons for years. Every time my father introduced her at neighborhood gatherings, he made sure to tell everyone that she was going to be a corporate lawyer. He said it with total conviction, as if it was already guaranteed. I was completely different. I preferred working outside and getting my hands dirty. When I was 14, I built a makeshift greenhouse in our backyard using scrap lumber from a construction site down the street and plastic sheeting from the hardware store. It was 7 feet tall, lopsided and rough around the edges, but it worked. I grew heirloom tomatoes in it all summer. That same year, my school science fair was scheduled for the exact same Saturday as Heather's regional spelling bee. I entered a project tracking tomato growth through soil pH balance and daily photo documentation. I won first place in my division. My father showed up 30 minutes late to the science fair, just as the organizers were packing up the tables. He looked at the ribbon pinned to my display board, told me good job in a completely flat voice, and immediately went back to checking his phone. He said Heather's event ran over schedule. That greenhouse stayed in the backyard for 9 years. I repaired the hinges and replaced the sheeting myself whenever it wore out. My mother called it an eyesore every time she walked past it. My father never mentioned it again. It did not matter to them, but I kept using it every single season regardless. When I graduated from high school in June, Heather received her acceptance letter to a prestigious MBA program at Columbia during the exact same week. My parents decided to combine both events into a single family dinner at a local Italian restaurant. During dinner, 3 speeches were made, and every single one of them was about Heather. My father raised his glass to celebrate his MBA daughter. My mother cried about how proud she was, and Heather thanked them for always prioritizing her education. No one mentioned my high school diploma or my 3.7 GPA. No one mentioned that I had been accepted into the state university's horticulture program either. I paid my own application fees using money I saved from doing lawn care and landscaping work for 6 neighbors since my sophomore year. When I finally told my mother about my degree choice, she set her cup down and told me that gardening was not a real career. She said it directly to my face, and later I found out she said it to relatives behind my back too. Our neighbor Barbara, who was close with my late grandmother Margaret, told me years later that my mother had complained on the phone about how embarrassing it was to tell people her younger daughter was studying plant science. My parents paid Heather's MBA tuition in full. It cost $22,000 a year, a figure my mother brought up regularly at holiday dinners as if it were a point of pride. For my degree, I covered every penny myself. I worked landscaping contracts in the summer, took job placements in the campus greenhouses during the winter, and took out small student loans to cover what was left. My parents never offered to assist with my tuition, nor did they ever ask how much I owed. 3 years after finishing her master's degree, Heather married a man named Jason who worked in investment banking. My parents treated their wedding like a national event. They beamed at the rehearsal dinner and talked nonstop about Jason's firm and his income. A couple of years later, Heather had her first child, Emma, and then 2 years after that, her son Lucas was born. My father retired from his insurance job right around the time Lucas was born, and from that point on, his entire life revolved around Heather's children. He drove down to her home in Darien 3 times a week. He built a wooden swing set in her backyard and spent hours reading books to Lucas. Heather quickly realized how much power she held over my parents through the grandchildren. She started using them as leverage whenever she wanted her way. The first time I saw it happen was during a family holiday dinner when Heather demanded the seat at the head of the dining table, and my father gave it to her without question. The second time was during a family photo shoot, when Heather insisted on taking group shots without me present, and my father asked me to step out of the frame so Heather would not be upset. The third time happened right in front of me, though my parents did not realize I was listening. I was standing in the hallway near the kitchen while my father had Heather on speakerphone. Heather told him explicitly that if he walked me down the aisle at my upcoming wedding, she would refuse to bring Emma and Lucas over for Christmas. My father did not argue. He just paused, cleared his throat, and told her that he understood and would handle it. 30 seconds later, my mother walked into the kitchen, saw me standing near the door, and realized I had overheard the entire phone call. She did not apologize. She simply told me that Heather was going through a difficult time with her marriage, that she was the mother of his grandchildren, and that we could not push her. That was the established dynamic in our family. Heather came first, the grandchildren came second, my parents' convenience came third, and I was at the very bottom of the list. I met Brandon 3 years ago on a county infrastructure job along Route 12. I had been hired as a subcontractor to design and install a rain garden drainage system along the roadside, and Brandon was the structural civil engineer managing a bridge replacement 60 yards away. We both arrived at the site at 6 in the morning in the freezing cold, drinking black coffee out of thermoses. He saw me unloading heavy dirt bags and wooden stakes out of my truck bed by myself, and walked right over to grab the other side of the bags. He did not try to take over or act superior. He just helped carry the materials, drank his coffee, and asked about the drainage layout. Our first actual date was a tour of a wholesale plant nursery, followed by eating food truck tacos in the parking lot. He had work boots on, I had work boots on, and it was the most straightforward, comfortable evening I had ever had. 2 weeks later, Brandon introduced me to his father, Arthur. Arthur was 63, a retired union carpenter with broad hands and a quiet demeanor. He lived alone in the house he had built with Brandon's mother before she passed away from cancer 8 years prior. He had a large woodworking shop in his backyard filled with tools, cedar cutoffs, and a radio that was always tuned to an oldies station. Arthur called me by name from day one and treated me like family almost immediately. Within 2 months of meeting me, he built me a heavy white oak bookshelf for my home office. He sanded it completely smooth, cut custom joinery, and carved my initials, MV, into the bottom inside corner of the left frame. It was subtle, but it was built to last a lifetime. Every morning when I sat at my desk, I looked at that piece of furniture and remembered that someone had spent hours building something specifically for me without asking for a single thing in return. When Brandon proposed to me, he did it at the Botanical Garden downtown, a public project that my landscaping company had designed and installed 2 years earlier. It was an autumn evening, and we were standing right next to a stone bench I had placed near the central walkway. He got down on one knee, pulled out the ring, and I said yes before he even finished his sentence. That night, I called my parents to share the news. My father answered on the 4th ring. I told him Brandon and I were engaged. He stayed silent for 3 seconds before saying the word congratulations in the exact flat tone a person uses when an acquaintance mentions a minor work promotion. My mother took the receiver next and immediately asked if Brandon came from a good family and what his father did for a living. She did not ask if I was happy, nor did she ask about the ring or the wedding plans. When I told her Arthur was a retired carpenter, she went completely silent on the line. I hand-delivered the formal wedding invitations to my parents' house a few months later. I dropped the envelope directly into their mailbox because I did not want to deal with a passive-aggressive conversation. I also asked my father directly if he would walk me down the aisle. He agreed immediately, nodding without emotion, the same way someone agrees to hold an elevator door open. Brandon saw right through them. He held my hand, looked at me, and reminded me that I knew exactly who my parents were. He told me that whatever I chose to do regarding my family, he supported me completely, but he wanted to make sure I was protecting myself. The final breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 days before the wedding. I was in my workshop trimming roses and setting up 14 centerpiece arrangements for the reception venue. The radio was playing in the background when my phone lit up on the workbench. It was my father. I picked up the call, and he used his official, detached voice, the tone he always used when he wanted to deliver bad news while avoiding any personal responsibility. He told me straight out that he was not walking me down the aisle. I set my pruning shears down on the table. I asked him why, and he stated plain and simple that Heather had told him it would upset her too much. He claimed that because Heather's marriage with Jason was currently unstable, watching our father give me away at a wedding would cause her unnecessary emotional distress. I asked him point blank if Heather had threatened to ban him from seeing Emma and Lucas for Christmas again. He went quiet for several seconds, dropped his voice, and admitted that she had made that exact threat. He had given in instantly, trading my wedding day to keep Heather appeased. I did not yell, raise my voice, or cry. I simply told him okay. He tried to explain himself, but I told him I heard him, said goodbye, and hung up the phone. I picked up the shears and went back to finishing the floral arrangements. My hands did not shake. I was not shocked because deep down, I had known for years that he would drop his obligations to me the second Heather snapped her fingers. 10 minutes later, my mother called. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She told me not to make a drama out of the situation and suggested I walk down the aisle by myself. She said that plenty of modern brides walk solo and that I should look at it as an empowering choice. I reminded her that I had asked my father a year ago and that he had promised to be there. She told me that circumstances change, that my sister was hurting, and that Heather needed support right now. When I asked her if my feelings mattered at all, she took a slow breath and told me that I had Brandon, whereas Heather was struggling alone. She told me to stop causing trouble over a minor detail and hung up. I walked out to my back porch, sat down on the steps, and looked out at my yard. Brandon came outside 20 minutes later. He did not ask what happened because he had already guessed based on the phone calls. He did not say I told you so. He just sat down next to me on the steps, put his arm around me, and stayed there in silence while I processed everything. The next morning, 2 days before the wedding, Brandon made breakfast and set a cup of coffee in front of me. He asked me directly what I wanted to do about the walk down the aisle. I told him plainly that I did not want to walk alone. Brandon set his mug down and told me that his father had been practicing tying his neckties for a week. He mentioned that Arthur had been looking forward to the wedding for months and that he drove out to my workshop every Saturday just to check on things and help out. Brandon said that Arthur had been waiting for me to ask him, but he had been too polite to bring it up himself because he did not want to step on my biological father's toes. An hour later, I drove out to Arthur's house in Chester. He was in his backyard workshop, wearing his canvas work apron and sanding down a teak rocking chair. The radio was playing classic rock in the background. I stood by the door of the garage for a moment before he noticed me. I told him directly that my father had backed out of walking me down the aisle. Arthur set his sandpaper down on the workbench immediately. He did not ask for gossip, he did not criticize my parents, and he did not make a dramatic scene. He looked at me with plain gray eyes and asked 5 simple words: "When do you need me?" I told him Saturday at 1 o'clock. He nodded, told me he would be there at noon sharp, and went right back to wiping down the chair frame. As I walked back to my truck, he called out quietly that he had been hoping I would ask him. The next 48 hours moved fast. My maid of honor, Lauren, took over the seating adjustments. She took the front row seat on the left side that had been designated for the father of the bride and placed a clear, printed name card on it that read Arthur Delaney. On Thursday afternoon, our neighbor Barbara came by my house holding a weathered yellow envelope. She explained that my grandmother Margaret had given it to her a week before she passed away 11 years ago, with strict instructions to hold on to it until the day I got married. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table. The letter inside was short and written in my grandmother's firm handwriting. She wrote that she knew how our family functioned, that my parents consistently looked past me, and that I should never waste my time waiting for them to validate my worth. She wrote that real family consists of the people who actually show up for you, and she told me to keep building a good life. I folded the note and put it inside my purse for the wedding day. My parents did not call on Thursday or Friday. They sent no texts and offered no apologies. They assumed I would be walking down the aisle by myself. I let them assume whatever they wanted. Friday evening was our rehearsal dinner at a local farm venue. Arthur arrived 20 minutes early in a crisp dress shirt and spent his time helping the catering staff unload folding chairs and tables because he saw them struggling with the weight. 30 people attended the dinner: Brandon's family, my college friend Rachel, 2 women from my weekend garden workshop group, Barbara and Lauren. Not a single person from my biological family showed up. During the toasts, Arthur stood up with his glass. He kept his speech brief. He said that 3 years ago, a capable woman had backed a truck up to his son's job site and unloaded heavy trees like it was nothing. He said he liked me instantly, and he added that while he had never had a daughter, he was grateful that life had finally brought one into his circle. Everyone at the table clapped, and Lauren wiped her eyes with a napkin. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my father was sitting at home in his house that same Friday night. Lauren told me weeks later that a mutual acquaintance had bumped into my father at a local gas station that evening. He looked stressed and drained. My mother had decided that they would still attend the wedding ceremony on Saturday, but only to sit in the very back row so nobody could accuse them of skipping it entirely, while simultaneously ensuring they did not look like active participants. My father had accepted her plan without argument. On Saturday morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and got ready. Lauren arrived at the venue bridal suite at 9 in the morning to help with my hair and makeup. Barbara came in an hour later carrying a small jewelry box containing a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother Margaret. At 10:45, there was a knock at the bridal suite door. Arthur was standing in the doorway wearing a new charcoal suit, a white pressed shirt, and a navy tie that Brandon had helped him pick out. His hands were broad and calloused, sticking out of the pressed suit cuffs. He looked at me in my wedding dress, cleared his throat, and reached into his coat pocket to pull out a small wooden box he had built from walnut. Inside was a handmade boutonniere crafted from dried oak leaves and tiny white flowers. He pinned it to his lapel, told me I looked strong and ready, and took a seat in the corner to wait. By noon, guests began filling the barn venue. Brandon's family filled the left side completely. My friends, local clients, and workshop attendees filled the right side. And in the very back row, tucked into the far corner, sat my mother, my father, and my sister Heather. My mother sat with her purse clutched in her lap, my father kept his eyes fixed on the floorboards, and Heather sat beside them looking irritated. They had shown up purely to preserve appearances, operating under the assumption that I would be walking down the aisle alone, and that they could claim they were present without having to take accountability. At 1 o'clock sharp, the music started. The string ensemble played an entry piece, and the bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one. Lauren went last, turning back to give me a quick nod before stepping through the barn doors. Arthur offered me his arm. His sleeve was neat, his grip was completely steady, and he looked straight ahead. He asked me if I was ready, and I told him I was. The barn doors opened wide, and sunlight poured across the reclaimed wood floor. 200 guests turned in their seats to watch the entrance. I walked into the room arm in arm with Arthur Delaney. We walked at a slow, deliberate pace down the central aisle. The guest reactions started within 10 steps. The people who knew the situation, Lauren, Rachel, Barbara, and my landscaping clients, smiled broadly. Other guests looked at Arthur, noticed his broad, working hands and charcoal suit, and then glanced back toward the rear row where my biological father sat frozen in his seat, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. I did not look back at my father, mother, or sister. I kept my chin up and my eyes locked straight ahead on Brandon, who was standing at the altar with a wide smile. When we reached the front of the room, the efficient, Reverend Karen looked at us and asked the standard question: "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Arthur cleared his throat and spoke in a clear, grounded voice that carried across the entire barn. He said that her real family gives her away, all the people who actually showed up today. A quiet murmur went through the front rows. Barbara dabbed her eyes and Lauren smiled. Arthur took my hand, placed it directly into Brandon's hand, squeezed my fingers once, and told me to go have a great marriage. Then he turned, stepped to the left, and took his seat in the front row, center aisle, the exact seat that had been assigned to the father of the bride. Brandon looked at his dad, mouthed a quick thank you, and then turned to me. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and were officially pronounced married at 27 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. The reception took place in the same barn right after the ceremony. Tables were brought out, food was served, and the band played music in the corner. Heather's 3-year-old son, Lucas, ran around the outer perimeter of the room chasing paper favors, while my parents sat at a small side table near the exit. At 3 o'clock, Arthur stood up to give his toast. He grabbed his glass, faced the crowd, and kept it short. He told a story about the first time I had ever visited his home for Sunday dinner 3 years ago. He said he had an old potted fern sitting on his porch that had been dying for months. He said I walked up the steps, took one look at it, repotted it with proper soil, moved it into better light, and told him he was overwatering it. He looked across the room at me and said that any person who takes time to fix a dying plant without being asked is the exact kind of person who knows how to care for the people around her. The whole room broke into applause. Around 4 o'clock, while I was standing near the dessert table cutting cake, my father walked over alone. He was holding a glass of water. His face was red, and he stood a few feet away looking extremely awkward. He looked at the cake, cleared his throat, and said that Arthur had done a good job walking me down the aisle. I looked him directly in the eye and asked him if he was sorry that he missed the moment, or if he was just embarrassed that 200 people saw someone else do his job. He flinched, opened his mouth to reply, but before he could say a word, my mother appeared beside him. She grabbed his elbow firmly, pulled him back toward their table, and told me under her breath not to create a scene at my own reception. I picked up a plate, set a slice of cake on it, and told her plainly that I was not making a scene, I was just eating my cake. She turned around and marched my father back to their seats. My father followed her without saying another word, just as he always did. Shortly after that, Frank and I had the traditional dance. The band played a slow acoustic song, and we danced on the wooden floor under the overhead lights. Frank stepped carefully, telling me in a quiet voice that he was trying his best not to step on my dress. I told him he was doing fine. In the corner of the room, Heather sat alone. Her husband Jason was not there. She had claimed to my parents that he was away on an urgent business trip, though everyone knew their marriage was falling apart. She sat holding a glass, watching the dance floor with a completely blank expression. Barbara walked over, sat down in the chair next to her for a moment, and told her quietly that my grandmother Margaret would have been proud of the day, before walking away. Heather did not respond. My parents and Heather left the venue quietly around 5 o'clock, slipping out the side door while guests were gathered near the photo booth. They did not say goodbye to me, to Brandon, or to anyone else. 2 days after the wedding, on Monday morning, I unlocked my workshop at 7 o'clock to get back to work. I had a major new commercial contract to review, a 1,200 square foot therapeutic garden layout for the local children's hospital. Brandon brought coffee by at 8, and Arthur dropped off a custom cherrywood cutting board he had finished in his shop over the weekend as an extra gift. He set it down on the counter, next to the oak bookshelf he had built me 3 years prior, chatted for a few minutes about lumber prices, and headed out to run errands. At noon, my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a text message from my father asking if we could talk. I looked at the screen, set the phone face down on my desk, and picked up my drafting pencils to focus on the hospital garden blueprints. I drew the perimeter lines, mapped out the walkway paths, and selected hardy perennial plants that could withstand tough weather and keep growing year after year. I did not respond to the text. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from Heather. I was on a project site measuring soil depths when her name showed up on the screen. I answered it. Her voice was flat and tired. She told me that Jason had officially packed his belongings and moved out of their house the previous week. She stayed quiet for a long moment before admitting that she had spent years trying to keep our parents completely focused on her problems because she was terrified of dealing with her own failing life. She admitted that she had demanded our father skip my wedding walk simply because she could not handle seeing me happy while her own marriage was falling apart. I listened to her speech without interrupting. When she finished, I told her plainly that I hoped she found a way to resolve her personal issues, but that I was no longer going to serve as her target or allow her to dictate my life. I wished her well, ended the call, and put my phone back in my pocket. A week after that, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox from my father. He wrote that sitting in the back row of that barn and watching another man walk his daughter down the aisle was the most humiliating moment of his life. He admitted that he had been cowardly for decades, choosing to give in to Heather's threats and my mother's demands because it was easier than standing up for what was right. He admitted that Arthur had earned the spot at the front of the church because Arthur had actually shown up when it counted. He wrote that he did not expect me to forgive him, but he wanted me to know that he was sorry. I read the letter twice, folded it up, and placed it in my desk drawer right next to my grandmother Margaret's note. I did not write back. Some relationships break because of a single massive argument, but most end because one person finally stops putting in all the effort to hold up a broken structure. My father spent 32 years choosing the path of least resistance, and in the end, he got exactly what he built. I built my own business, found a real family with Brandon and Arthur, and stepped into a life where showing up actually matters. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Payback Stories for a new family drama story every day, and I'll see you in the next one.